Now, last week in our groups, we went through John chapter 9, where Jesus heals the man born blind. And I hope that you really enjoyed that chapter. Because one of the main things that we see that Jesus does is Jesus blows apart people's boxes. And when I say that he blows apart our boxes, we all have boxes that we try to put Jesus into. We try to put God into boxes. The Pharisees had a box that they tried to put God into. The disciples had a box. Now let's be honest, you and I, we have boxes too. And one of the things that you need to know is that Jesus is going to blow open our boxes. He's going to blow our minds. And we need to realize, we need to get comfortable with the fact that God is bigger than the box that we try to cram him into. And so I guess it's an invitation that we need to open our mind and say, okay, God, what exactly is it that you want to teach us? And the one thing that I really wanted you to pick up on last week was that, man, God wants us that when we love Jesus, that we don't keep him to ourselves. This man who was born blind, he was ready to be kicked out of the temple for life because he loved Jesus. Even though he hadn't met Jesus, he still loved Jesus so much that he wanted to tell everybody else about him. I hope that's something that you and I do as well. In John chapter 10, which is what we're going through this week, there's a lot of imagery about a shepherd and his sheep. And what Jesus is doing is Jesus is using a physical representation of a spiritual truth. He's using something physical like the relationship between a shepherd and a sheep to explain the spiritual reality of Jesus' relationship with you and me. And it's a unique relationship. And so in order for us to be able to truly understand this, we need to understand what it's like to have this relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. And Jesus used that imagery because in Israel, even to this day, because of the mountains, there's a lot of sheep and there's a lot of shepherds. You can't raise cattle there. You need flatter land for cattle. But there's all kinds of mountains and stuff. So sheep and goats do really well up there. And so you've got a whole lot of sheep and shepherd. Now, some of the things that we need to know about the relationship between the sheep and the shepherd is that the shepherd absolutely protects the sheep. Whatever it takes, a shepherd is willing to get injured himself in order to protect his sheep. And the sheep know that, and because they know that, they absolutely trust the shepherd. That's one of the things that you really need to know about that relationship. Another thing that is interesting about that relationship is that the sheep recognize the shepherd's voice. They so trust the shepherd. And you'll actually see Jesus mentioning how, man, the sheep know the shepherd's voice. They know it so much that even today in Israel, a lot of shepherds will get together to have lunch. And when it's time to separate out the herds, you'll have shepherds standing on opposite corners and they'll call out to their sheep. And the sheep never get mixed up. They never end up in somebody else's flock. They always end up right where they're supposed to be because sheep know their shepherd's voice. In the same way, those of us who are true believers in Jesus, man, we know his voice. We know truth when we hear it because we're his followers. There's a lot of interesting things that go on in this chapter. But the main thing that I want you to focus on is this question: what is Jesus claiming when he claims to be the gate? You see, Jesus claims to be also the shepherd, the great shepherd, but he calls himself the gate to the sheep pen. What exactly is Jesus trying to say? Some other things that you may want to discuss in your small groups. Who's the thief? When it talks about the thief, who is that referring to? The hired hand. Who is the hired hand in the story? Finally, in verse 16, when Jesus says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. What does that mean? What is Jesus trying to get at? Well, finally, I want to bring your attention to verse 18. Man, nobody takes from my life from me. Jesus says, nobody takes my life from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I lay it down and I take it up myself. And so many of us, sometimes we think of the cross as something that happened to Jesus, that people put him on the cross. But when in reality, Jesus laid down his own life for us. He didn't have to do that, but he did that because he wanted to. All those things are amazing, but the question still remains for your group. What is Jesus claiming when he calls himself the gate? Have an awesome time in your class today, and God bless you.